Well, we are in the middle of another series that we're calling Moral Compass. And so the first week, we just wanted to identify really the foundation for the rest of the series. And we asked the question, when it comes to our moral compass, that thing that kind of helps us determine what's right and wrong, what is that based on? Well, it's based on our culture, our environment, our family, our perspective, our opinion, our desire. And the problem is, even in ourselves, it's not very consistent. I change depending on culture or on desire. And so we ask the question, is there something that is constant, consistent, that we can trust that's bigger than ourselves? And the answer was, yeah, it's God. Not church, because church gets it wrong sometimes. God. Not religion. God. And so God has shown himself to us, revealed himself to us through his word, through his Son, Jesus Christ, and through the Holy Spirit. And last week, we had that amazing conversation about sex, where we identified the reality that God, where God stands on that topic is, yes, it's a beautiful thing, but it's designed within the confines of marriage. Culture speaks differently than that. Even my own desire speaks differently to that. That's where God stands. And so if I want to stand where God stands, I have to adjust my compass to be pointing towards him on all of these topics. Despite what I want or would like for it to be, where does God stand? So today, the conversation is about values. Values are a very tricky, at times confusing thing. If you have done any kind of premarital counseling with me, you've heard this multiple times. Values can cause a lot of problems for people. It's what you value. We always talk in our classes a lot of times about in a marriage, oftentimes you'll have one person in the marriage, the spouse, who has a high value in a clean house. The house a certain way, in a certain order, in a certain, cleanliness. And you'll have another person oftentimes in that same marriage who doesn't have that value. That's Elia and I. I don't have any value in cleaning the house. I like it being clean. I don't want to do it. It's not a value that I have. And so there are socks on the floor. There are shoes in different angles throughout the whole house. I know where they're at. I'll get them when I need them. Or I'll ask Elia where they're at. My socks on the bedroom floor, I'll wear them again. What's the big deal? Underwear we wash. But if you're not careful in a marriage, you can create a lot of tension, a lot of friction, a lot of fights. Because what we oftentimes do is we attach morality to our values. Sometimes that's very appropriate. Sometimes it's not. When it comes to being clean in the house, okay, we all would mostly agree it's a good idea. But I'm not a bad person and going to hell because I don't clean the house very well. But in marriages, sometimes we have that attachment to morality, and we think and we add to that person, you're wrong, you're intentionally being disrespectful, you're bad. And we have those values, we have billions of them built into us that we oftentimes, if you don't see this think this thing the way I see it, you're wrong, not just personally, but morally. At times, it's very appropriate. At other times, it's not. Values are where we put oftentimes our time, our energy, our focus, and our money. If I'm being transparent with you all, which I don't like to be transparent with you all because it hurts, being honest sometimes, is I have a high value. It's not like a conscious decision. It's just what I enjoy doing in video games. I like playing them, spending a lot of time in them, and if I'm not careful, I will spend a whole lot of time, effort, energy, and money on them. to the detriment of everything else. A story I will share with you is when we were just married, we had just had Ren, our oldest, and I'm playing this video game a lot. And I'm on the computer, and I turn around, and Ren's walking. And I said, when did that happen? And she said, a couple days ago, I told you, but you didn't listen. I missed it. Because my value in that game had taken so much focus, my value in my family had decreased. I didn't mean for it to happen that way. It's just what happened. If I'm not careful, I am prone to have that kind of, here we go, obsession or addiction. And I have to constantly be on guard against that because that value pulls me away from a value that I know is much more valuable. So the question is, where does God, or what does God value? What are his values? Because if my values and God's values aren't the same, at times that's okay. Okay, hear me carefully here. But if a value I have is pulling me away from a value God has, that's extremely dangerous. Our values point and shift and move our compasses around. It's like taking a magnet and moving it next to the compass and making it move a different direction. And then trusting that's okay. It's dangerous. And so I'm going to give you 3 things that God values. He values a lot more than just 3 things. Okay, but here's 3 of them. And the challenge becomes, where I stand and what I'm doing compared to where God values and what God values is what I'm doing shifting me or pulling me away from those things that God values. Number 1, God values action. God values action. The book of John, we read a lot about how Jesus is frustrated or annoyed with the reality that people know so much, all his knowledge, and they do nothing with it. There's no action. It's just words and thought with no movement. The book of James, the half-brother of Jesus, speaks into this whole idea in a way that if we're not careful, we can think it contradicts faith. It doesn't, and we'll see. James 1, verse 21 through 27. Therefore, putting aside all filthiness and all that remains of wickedness, in humility, that's a big piece there, humility. Why? If I'm prideful, I'm arrogant, I don't learn very well. Because I don't need to learn, I know it all. Which of me is true, but for you all, you got me, thanks. So in humility, so I can actually be used and learn, receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls, but prove yourselves, here we go, doers of the word, and not merely hearers who delude themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was. How is that possible? How do you forget what you look like? One example, to me, a great example is here in this room, or when you're doing your Bible reading, which, by the way, statistically, 80% of you all don't. Hopefully that's not true in this room, but it probably is. Let's work on that a little bit, okay? But when we are challenged, we know what God has called us to do, God has asked us to do, whether it be a lifetime commitment or simply an action to take in the next couple weeks. We know what God has called us. Our heart begins to pump really hard. We're feeling convicted or pressed or impressed. We know what it is, okay? It's like seeing a mirror. I know exactly who I am. I know exactly who God has asked me to be, whether it be this week or for life. And then you leave the room, you leave the building, you get in your car, and the further from the mirror you get, the more you forget what that person looked like and we get in our homes, we get in our chairs, and we completely forget. And we heard, we knew, and did nothing with it. What James is saying is, that's what it means to be a hearer, not a doer. Verse 25, but one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and abides by it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but an effectual doer, this man will be blessed in what they do. What James is saying is, we've got to stop just hearing and knowing. We've got to do something with it. I think we're all at times guilty of that, aren't we? I know all the right answers. I've read this thing cover to cover. I can tell you all the prophets. I actually can't, but maybe you can. I know all the prophets. I know all the word. I know all the stories of Christ, all the narratives. I got it all up here. What do you do with it? God values action, not just knowledge. I'm glad you can hear. I gave you those ears. Now I'll give you feet and some hands too. Go use it. James continues in James chapter 2, verses 18 through 26. But someone may well say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without the works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Now, that seems to be a kind of a contradiction, like a tension there. And it creates this argument in many churches about faith versus works, okay? What I believe as opposed to what I do. And what James isn't saying is they're separate. He's saying they're together. If you believe, you'll do something with it. There's an action required of it. If we say, I believe, I know that Christ died for me. I know that I have faith. I know that who God is, and that's enough. I'm good. And what James is saying, where's the evidence? Where's the fruit? Where's the action? Because God values action. Verse 19, you believe that God is one. You do well. The demons also believe and shudder. But are you willing to recognize, you foolish fellow, that faith without works is useless? Was not Abraham, our father, justified by works when he offered up Isaac, his son, on the altar? You see, the faith was working with the works. And as a result of the works, faith was perfection. Okay, Abraham was promised a nation for his children, a great nation, and the stars in the sky will not be able to number the kids that he has. And he has one son that he's supposed to have that promise through, Isaac. And God says to him, he's 90 years old, 100 years old, and God says to him, you have your son, now go and kill him on the altar. And Abraham, he believes that God made a promise. He believes that God told him he would have a nation. He believes that God is exactly who God said he is and was and will forever be. And God required an action of him. If you believe, show me. And he marches Isaac up the mountain, ties him to an altar, and prepares to kill him. And before he finishes, God stops him. And he says, now I know, not only do you believe, you believe. Action. Verse 23. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, and Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. You see, that a man is justified not by works, and not by faith alone. Is justified by works and not by faith alone. In the same way was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way. For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. If God values action, the question becomes, what am I doing with that which I've been called to do? You've learned, you've been challenged, you've seen, you've been asked. What are you doing with it? And if in my life I'm looking at my value system and I know that I have values that I'm not sure God cares about video games for or against. He cares when I'm so invested in this value, it takes me away from action. That he cares about. He may care about what games I play because some are pretty bad, for being honest. But sometimes we have this value system and we think about, well, I value this, and we forget that when we value it so much, we're sacrificing something else. And if it's action, we got to change something. This is taking too much of my time and my focus. Number 2, God values relationship. In Genesis 1, we get the creation of the world. We get later on the creation of man, Adam. And God wanted Adam to have relationship with him, being God, and with something else. And he found nothing suitable, and so he made Eve for him and found that it was good. And man, for a moment, had a relationship with itself, with each other, and with God. And then man and woman, people, chose disobedience and destroyed relationship with God and with each other. And after that point, God has worked, God has been moving through the entire Bible. We see it, that God is trying to restore relationship back with him. That's the whole narrative. Genesis to Matthew, and then Christ comes. And we see in Christ God on earth as he builds relationships with people, his disciples, deep, meaningful friendships, relationships, right? He builds them with women, which in that day and age was a no-no. He builds relationship with the sinners, the do-nots, the don't touch. And we see Christ valuing relationship with each other and God. 1 Peter 3:18. For Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that, here we go, he might bring us to God. So that he might bring us to God. Christ died so that we could be brought back into relationship with him. That's the narrative. We miss that sometimes. God died to keep me out of hell. God died for my sins. Yes and yes, but God also died to bring you back into relationship with him, with God. So that, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. Matthew 22, we get Jesus Christ himself. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. Second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. Now tell me how love is not about relationship. It's not. I mean, it is, sorry. Of course it is. So relationships should not just be simply knowing people and interacting. It's about loving them and loving God and being loved by people and being loved by God. And if what I'm doing in my own value system is pulling me away from relationship with God or other people in love, then something has to change. If God values it, I should too. Number 3, God values mercy. That word mercy means a lot of things. It means compassion, loving kindness. It also can mean loyalty in the Hebrew. Hosea 6:6 The prophet Hosea is speaking, where God's speaking through him, is speaking to the nation of Israel. And he's telling them, "For I delight in loyalty or mercy or compassion rather than sacrifice, and in the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." You see, the people then and later and even now, they tend to follow the law, the letter of the law, and that determines how good they are, or how righteous, or how worthy they are. And what Hosea is saying, what God is saying to Hosea is, I don't desire all these sacrifices. Here in our culture, it's coming to church. That's great. I'm glad to do it. That's not what I value above mercy and compassion. We all know people who have been raised and lived and breathed church. That's our sacrifices. That's what kind of, to me, is a lot of the legality that we currently have in our faith. We have people who know it all. They know all the letter of the law, they know all the Bible, and they have no compassion. You know people like that, don't you? And they see someone who certainly needs God, and instead all they see is disgust. They see filth, and they want nothing to do with them. And God forbid they walk in my church. That's the attitude we have. Why? Because our value system, how I look, how I dress, how I talk, has gotten so high to the detriment of the value of mercy and compassion. That's the case in our own lives. Something has to change. Matthew 10 through 13, Jesus himself, he quotes Hosea. Then it happened that as Jesus was reclining at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were dining with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why is your teacher eating with the tax collectors and sinners?" But when Jesus heard this, he said, "It is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire compassion. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners." What is your value system like? And maybe you don't call it that. What are your time being spent? Your energy, your effort, your money? Is it pulling you away from any of these three things that God values? If it is, something has to change. You know, a great example in our culture, in the Midwest especially, is that we have a high value in hard work, don't we? The high value that we have. Nothing wrong with that. But here's what happened. Here's the extreme that we've seen. And maybe in your own home, you've seen it, whether it be your father, maybe your mother, or maybe even your spouse or yourself. We see this pat on the back. Man, that person sacrificed so much for their family. They missed dinners. They went overnight to make money, to earn enough to support the family. And have that house and have those cars. Man, what an incredible father or mother they were. And we pat them on the back. And we know the songs. We know the stories. We may have known people or ourselves have the same story. We have people, kids, growing up not knowing a parent or both parents. I guarantee you, ask any kid, do you want that new bike or dad to be home? They're going to tell you, I want dad to be home. But we don't acknowledge that as being a value in our society, do we? I would much rather get a pat on the back for saying, "Sam, man, you sacrificed so much. You took a pay cut. You took less hours. You got a smaller house. You traded in your new car for a junker so you could be home with your kids." That's much more in line with God's value. And we've elevated this value system about wealth and working hard. Nothing wrong with those things. But when they take away from the other values that God has, there is definitely something wrong with that. I don't want my kids growing up without knowing who their dad is. When I took this job 2.5 years ago, when I was doing youth ministry and I was being your interim, doing both positions at once, I told the board, listen, I can't do this for very long. I can't do it. I'll do it for a time. Sometimes it takes a time. Like I'll do it for 9 months. And every 3 months we'll meet again and I'll decrease something else. But I cannot be gone for this long, for very much longer. And even then, I'd leave for a meeting and Ren would say, are you leaving again? I'd say, yeah, I am. And I had to do a value check. Even still now, like my value, I'm big about building relationships. So if you want to meet with me, when can you do it? Well, let's go do it. And at times, if I'm not careful, I'll say no to my family and yes to you all consistently. At times, that may have to happen, but it should not be the rule. It should be the exception. And so I have to consistently, and at times, it takes my daughter reminding me by saying, Dad, you're leaving again? Not tomorrow, I'm not. Something's got to change. And so our culture, at times, as we begin looking at the values of God and working towards those values, our culture may say, man, you are hurting yourself. You're going to sell your nice house and buy something smaller? That's backwards. You're going to trade in your newer car and get something that's old, that's paid off? Why would you want to do that? My family means more because relationship in love means a whole lot more to me than other things. Now, if you can do both, that's fine. I got no problem with that. But I know I probably can't. What are your values? Can you honestly take a look at your life and say, listen, I'm spending a lot of time on this, a lot of energy and effort and money on this, and it's pulling me away from one of these 3 or million things that God values. Okay, let's be honest, it's more than just 3. But let's just make it simple. Look at your life. Seriously, look at your life. Identify something in your life that has a value to you and maybe it's pulling you away. 10 years ago, I would have told you this story. If the world ended and we're all buried in rubble and aliens came, I don't believe in aliens. I'm not going to get in an argument with you guys, okay? It's an example. Aliens came to our world and began to do some digging. And they dug up our homes and said, hey, these people, these humans, they have these 4 walls that must be where they live. We'll call it a house. And in these 4 walls, they have other walls that have rooms. And each of these rooms, they have different purposes. They must go to the bathroom here and spend a lot of time here. Now, most of these rooms have their God in them. It's pretty cool. These rectangle boxes that hang on the wall or that are on a stand or on the floor. And they must be a really important God because it's in like every room in the house. And they must spend a lot of time worshiping this God because these seats that are all designed to look right at their God, right? Our rooms are based around our TV, let's be honest, guys, right? It has like indentation where their butt was at. They must spend a lot of time in that seat watching their God, right? But now, I got to tell you, it's our phone, which we can keep with us wherever we want. And we've taken a value, and maybe it's a certain app. Maybe it's just having the phone. I don't know what it is for you. Social media, that's the big bad guy these days. And we've oftentimes put a value in this time, this energy, our money into this device to detriment of things that are actually valuable. My 9-year-old and my 6-year-old, they want phones. Why? Because they learned the value of a phone from me. Dad has that phone a whole lot. He's looking at it a whole lot. At times, he doesn't hear what I'm saying because he's on his phone. That phone must be very, very valuable. messed up, and I mean, put it in those words. So what in your life can you say, no, I can stop this let's give it a month. Let's just try it. And in place of this, I'm going to look at one of these three values: action, mercy, compassion, or relationship in love. I'm going to take my energy, my focus, my time, and spend it on one of those three things and just see what happens. After a month, you can say, Sam, it was the dumbest idea you ever had. It didn't work. That probably won't happen, by the way. Can we begin to look at God's value system and say, listen, God, I just want to be where you are. I'm sick and tired of my own values, my video game value, my phone value, my TV binge watching Netflix value, to be taking me away from your values. And it changes my compass. Somewhere it should not be pointing. Help me correct it. Our team comes up to close in a song. One of the great, interesting, and maybe it's a better way to put it, things about committed Christians and people who really desire God and who really want to know God. You know, some benchmarks for identifying them is reading their Bible, but also a big one, and number one actually, is confession. I didn't know that. Confessing, recognizing I am wrong. I'm not perfect. And so the altar, a place for that, a way we use the altar is to say, I'm going to confess. My shortcomings, my mistakes, my sin. God, I have gotten my value system all out of whack. I am nowhere near where you are in value. I'm so off. God, I confess that to you. And we oftentimes, we think about it, we kind of misthink this. We need each other to hold us accountable. And so we go to each other and we say, no, Mike, I'm struggling with this. Let me confess to you where I'm. He can't save me. They hold me accountable. And so a great place for the altar thing to do is to come and just confess. This is where I've screwed up, God. My values are all messed up. Help me to see your values and sacrifice some of mine. I don't want to see myself so clearly today. Church, many of you are seeing yourself in a mirror, and you're seeing what God is showing you, who you need to be, whether it be an action, showing some mercy, some compassion, building relationship in love, and you know exactly what that is. You see it clearly. And you'll leave here today, and the further you get from this room, it'll dim. And you'll forget what you look like. The altars are open. If you want to come and just pray, confess, God forbid you don't come because you're afraid someone will look at you differently. Hey, I'm broken. I'm pretty screwed up. Spend a lot of time in prayer, confessing my own shortcomings before I can even come up here before you. Would you come and just say, God, I confess this to you. Help me to make some changes. Identify one thing in my life that I can decrease so I can increase in where you value. If you want to come and be left alone and just be, come and pray, this side is for you. Come and no one will bother you. If you want to come and pray with someone, you can bring them with you or we'll come to you. Just come to the side. But don't leave here and forget what you look like.